Hi everyone, Julie Ponesse here. 6 months ago, when I was fired from my job as a university professor for failing to comply with my university's vaccine mandate, I really couldn't have imagined at that point that I would have another job where I was as fulfilled intellectually, where I got to think and talk and engage in discourse with such interesting people every day. 6 months before that, I wouldn't have imagined that I would have had any other job besides being a university professor. But now, to be honest, I get to talk with people from all walks of life who are such unique, special people that have shown so much courage and integrity and wisdom and hope against all odds. And one of these, someone who is very dear to me, Corporal Danny Bulford, who's a former RCMP officer, and he was part of our Prime Minister's protection detail. So his job for a period of time was to protect the life of our Prime Minister and other significant dignitaries in Canada and those who visited Canada. I had the pleasure of interviewing Danny a few months ago. At that time, he was facing disciplinary action for the RCMP for failing to comply with their vaccine mandate, and he was facing possible termination. Some time has passed, but really an awful lot has happened since that point. Since then, Danny became very instrumental in the Freedom Convoy that ended up in Ottawa and was present and very involved in operations for the duration of the convoy, and that culminated in his eventual arrest. And last week I had the pleasure to sit down and chat with Danny, and we talked about what really happened in Ottawa, what's going on in our government, what's going on in the minds of people in Canada possibly, and whether or not it's reasonable, it's possible to have hope for the future. So I really hope you enjoy our chat today, and if you enjoy these kinds of conversations, I would encourage you to subscribe to the Democracy Fund channel on YouTube, to check out our website, thedemocracyfund.ca, and if you're interested, check out my book website, mychoicebook.ca. Thanks so much and enjoy our chat. Can you get us through the events that led up to what happened at the end of January in Ottawa, and how you became involved in the Ottawa convoy?
Sure. So, okay. So,
This is what everybody wants to know, I think.
over the course of, the fall and early 2021, so December and January, I was continuing to speak on behalf of Mounties for Freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And I had also been doing some work with a group taking back our freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
And leading up to the convoy, I was actually planning my actual plan for when the convoy landed in Ottawa was to provide security for people who have spoken out, who are higher profile speakers, who have also been subject to threats. So that was supposed to be my primary role. And then on the Tuesday night before the convoy landed in Ottawa, so if you just want one moment, I'll just check my calendar. I think that was like the 24th or 25th of
They rolled
January.
in on kind of Friday afternoon, Saturday morning.
Yeah, they rolled in on a Friday. That's right.
Tuesday before that.
Yeah. So on the night of January 25th, I got a phone call from a friend asking if I could help organize security, like the volunteer security, for when the convoy landed in Ottawa. And I felt like I couldn't say no, right? Like no other profession stood up for the rights and freedoms of Canadians en masse until the truck convoy. And I'd been paying attention. I was so excited for when they came to town, right? Like you see the support that they're getting as they're traveling across Canada, all the videos, the overpass is packed with people lined up along the highway, like the stories of the places, the stories of places that they had stopped for overnight and the reception parties that they would get with like people bringing tons of food. Absolutely. Right. And it was like, I had to say yes, right? There's no way I was gonna not help these people who took them. Yeah, well, and they took a stand for me and my family and others like me or others like us when nobody else did. Yeah. our government didn't do it, not even the official opposition, until the convoy became so, supported. Our police didn't do it. Our courts didn't do it. Our doctors didn't do it.
They're still not doing it.
Right? Like the vast majority of people are still silent, even if they feel the same way. Even if they feel and think the same way as me, the vast majority of people are still silent. So I felt morally obligated to, yes, absolutely, I will help as best as I can. So the following Wednesday, the next morning, I went to my first meeting about it, and there was just a small handful of people around this kitchen table. And I realized, like, oh my goodness,
what have I gotten?
This is a massive machine that is about to roll into the city of Ottawa, and we have about 2 days to prepare for it. And like, it was a mad scramble to get volunteers organized and like contacted and lined up and agreed to help. And it was,
who are these, if you're
quite
able to
chaotic.
say, who are these people that are organizing things in Ottawa? This would be Wednesday, right? And the truckers are, I don't know, they're in Northern Ontario now or something. And you're sitting at this kitchen table in Ottawa, and who's trying to get this organized for them?
Well, I'm not going to share names, but
Fair
it was,
enough.
because anyone who's identified as an organizer seems to become a target of the federal government and the RCMP. So
I was going to say, not just seems to, there's evidence for that. But as you said it earlier, we don't care about evidence. So never mind.
I can talk about the evidence for that too. So it was all the people, it was the people who founded the Adopt a Trucker, right? Like and the initial intention was, you know what, we're going to provide people food and transportation, like shuttle transportation, and try and find places for people to sleep if they need them, like try and help these people, provide these people the basic necessities of life on a volunteer basis, because of course most people who are coming with the convoy or who are coming as a supporter for the convoy are no longer working, right? A lot of the vast majority of these people have lost their job. And so we were trying to like set something up that would be able to accommodate this massive influx of people in Ottawa, so that people would have food, water, shelter, transportation, right?
And did they have any idea at the time how long? I mean, it ended up going on, what was it, 3 weeks or 3.5 weeks? Did they have any sense of that at the time, that they were planning for that kind of duration?
No, I don't think so. I think people expected like, maybe 3 days to a week or so. I don't know for certain.
A tenth of what, or something.
Yes, right. So, but we knew that the convoy was huge, right? Like you were hearing various numbers, but we knew that it was in the thousands of trucks.
Okay,
right?
Well, I was going to ask you that because I kept hearing different things, but you would have had a good sense of.
I honestly, I don't know what the final number was, because I never even got to all of the places that people were. Like I never physically made it to the staging area at Coventry Road. Like I basically lived out of one location for almost that entire 3 weeks. And I would only get out periodically to kind of go give myself a bit of a mental break and go recharge by being amongst the trucks and amongst the crowds. But it was a lot. But there was, it was ranging anywhere between like 10,000 to 50,000 trucks. And I was thinking to myself, oh my God, like 50,000 trucks. Like, I don't know if it was ever that big, but it was big. And
so they knew, or you knew, that organization had to happen. You didn't really know how many people you were organizing, or for how long, or what would be required, or how cold it would be, or what the Ottawa Police would do, or so you knew that decisions had to be made, but the particulars were so sort of fluid and unknown.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it was what I've said to people, because it was chaotic for sure, and the first week especially was quite stressful. Like people were living on no sleep and just go. Like your phone never stopped ringing, and it was, it was easy to get frustrated because there was no like real structure in place for those initial days. And I kept trying to remind people, like, look, a big event like this in downtown Ottawa, like a Canada Day scale event, is about a year in the planning.
Right.
And that's when you're talking about paid professionals, where that is their full-time job, planning all the different components. Like, we are making it work as best we can on a volunteer basis and on 2 days notice, right? Like, it was significant. It was a massive undertaking. So, I mean, everyone who stepped up was like, I think everyone at some point in time felt completely overwhelmed, but we knew that, well, we don't have a choice. We just have to keep going, right? Like, so do the best you can. And it was incredible. Like, the talent level of people that came out of the woodwork, just unsolicited, to offer their help, was incredible. Like, it felt like we had teams of people from professional backgrounds helping in every aspect. It was incredible. And
Are you able, don't, I certainly understand why you don't want to mention specific names or maybe even specific positions, but can you give a bit of a sense of the kinds of skill sets that people had that were helping to, make this system work?
well, we had people from almost every profession. Like, I mean, obviously the truck drivers, and I mean, the people that came from that community, like the trucker community, and the working class blue collar people that came as part of that convoy. Like, you want to talk about people who know how to get stuff done when you need it. Like, you didn't even have to ask twice, and most of the time you didn't have to ask at all. They were just doing things on their own initiative, like cleaning up the sidewalks, feeding homeless people, setting up like events for people to entertain themselves, like street hockey games and bouncy castles. I mean, those are the things that have gotten a lot of attention, right?
Well, no,
People did that all on their own initiative.
let's
Like,
pause on that, because Danny, I don't know if they've gotten enough attention. They've gotten attention with certain, like the Freedom Convoy 2022 Instagram channel, things like that. But so those things are real, were they? Because so many, like a lot of people, someone like myself, I was there for a few days. You come home and you tell people back home what happened, and they'll say, "Oh, that's just fake news."
no, that's 100%
So
real. Like,
what I saw people with my own eyes, truckers cleaning the streets. I saw them because it was really slushy and compacted and slippery when I was there. So they were kind of like, getting rid of that slushy ice stuff. I saw them picking up garbage.
yep.
I saw some hockey in the streets. That's what I saw with my own eyes. So can you tell us what else was going on, in the weeks following?
Well, one example is the I guess you call them block captains in the different parts of the city where truckers were congregated. They set up their own community night watch because we didn't have enough security volunteers to provide, like, everywhere with security 24/7. And so they took some of that responsibility on themselves on their own. That was an idea that I had in my head. And when I went to go speak to someone about it, they had already set that up in motion. And so, like, a community watch. And so they would patrol in pairs, keeping an eye on things, because, like, all through the night, because they knew that, well, trucks were being vandalized, but also, like, to keep an eye on the community itself, right? Because our biggest fear was that someone, or like an individual or a small group, would try and infiltrate the convoy and destroy businesses and do things that would, or incite some kind of violent altercation,
Posing as part of
the convoy, right? To try and discredit the convoy. And all the police officers that I spoke to in those initial 2 weeks, I had the impression that they all believed that that was the most likely scenario. That was the greatest threat, was someone trying to infiltrate the convoy to discredit the convoy or to further their own agenda. No matter what end of the spectrum, like Antifa types, right up to like a right-wing extremist. No one in the convoy wanted that, or everyone in the convoy was extremely vigilant about making sure that didn't happen, because we're all aware of what we're being described as, right? Racist, misogynist, all of those horrible derogatory
terms. They're the same
terms.
thing. Didn't you hear, if you are a racist, then you're necessarily a misogynist, which necessarily means you hate science, which necessarily means you're conservative. So
right.
These are all synonyms for one another.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, we all wanted to prove to the world, like, no, that's not us. We're just regular people who've been pushed too far and we want our freedom back, right? Like,
Well,
drop the mandates and we'll like drop the mandates and leave us alone, and we'll go continue to be hardworking, productive
you
citizens.
say regular people, but I would say better than that. I mean, the truckers I met there were the love, like way nicer than the average person that you
Yeah.
run into in the street. I could not believe their generosity. And these, I mean, and it was cold. It was
Yeah.
bitterly cold. They'd been driving for who knows how long, depending on where they picked up the convoy. And they were so generous. They're giving away
Mm-hmm.
food. They're still happy to chat. They're laughing. Um, I had to get into the city and out of the city. They all helped. I mean, I don't remember the last time I met such a kind, generous, selfless, optimistic group of people.
I
You know,
I've I will forever be grateful to those people. They they did more for us than anybody else in this country has for as long as I can remember,
maybe ever.
maybe ever. Um, and to anyone who would question what that convoy was actually like based on what they've seen in the media, my immediate answer is, did you come there and see it for yourself?
Mhm.
And some of the responses like, well, no, I couldn't. It's like, no, that's a lie. You could absolutely get downtown and you would have been welcomed with open arms, no matter
Or
your background.
no, I
And
didn't need to because I watched the news.
yeah, well, the news is lying like they do about everything. And we, the, it was the most joyful and optimistic, hopeful, massive crowd that I've ever seen.
Mhm.
Um, before I forget, a lot of those things that you did mention before, though, like the bouncy cancels, I've seen it with my own eyes. They set up a big wall tent with specific for different children's activities to be done inside. Literally big cooking stations where you could like free food, free hot drinks, daily like stuffing backpacks of homeless people with food. Like Ottawa or the truck convoy took care of the downtown core of Ottawa, of the city of Ottawa. It was cleaner than ever before. They managed the snow removal because of the barricades prevented snow removal from taking place.
Mhm.
And so they took care of all of that, all on their own initiative. They didn't have to, but they did because they wanted to show a level of respect to the city, right?
Mhm.
And the Terry Fox statue and the War Memorial, there was that circulating negative messages about how they'd been desecrated and decorated. And as soon as anything like that happened, they took immediate action to remedy that negative messaging, and they had 24/7 security at the War Memorial, a lot of provided by veterans the majority of the time, and then they had truck convoy personnel, 24-hour security, living in tents in like 30 below weather to make sure that the Terry Fox statue was guarded. Like I seen that, I witnessed that with my own eyes. I
I mean,
talked to those
I
people.
hadn't even heard either of those things, and I watch all the alternative media streams. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, I seen it with my own eyes. And again, that was stuff they all did on their own initiative. People would come to me saying, hey, we need security for the War Memorial, or hey, we need security for Terry
Hmm.
Fox. And then you would find out people had already set that up.
You mentioned earlier that early on, so late days of January, I guess early days of February, you had pretty collegial conversations with Ottawa Police.
Yeah, I would say the first 2 weeks, the liaison officers with the Ottawa Police were really good to deal with. The OPP liaison officers were good to deal with throughout the entire time, even into the third week. The RCMP guy, I knew him from, like, we had been in meetings previously.
Mhm.
Um, he was more just in an information, like in an information role. Like he wasn't out on the street, right? So,
Mhm.
but still same thing. Like If there was information that we felt was a legitimate, security or public safety concern, like we were openly communicating back and forth, and everyone was always grateful for the sharing of the information. And the Parliamentary Protective Service was actually really, really good to deal with as well.
And how did it happen that you got connected with did they come and find you upon the arrival of the convoy in Ottawa? Did one of you approach Ottawa Police, or how did that relationship happen initially?
Okay, so initially I was put in contact with an Ottawa police officer as their lead liaison officer through Adopt a Trucker. So that Wednesday morning, when I went to that kitchen table for our first meeting, and I was identified as the guy who would be running the volunteer security and liaising with the police, I was given an officer's name and contact number, and that's actually who I communicated with that very day about the plan. Like the Ottawa Police provided me with a plan of routes for the different components of the truck convoy to enter into the city of Ottawa, and the staging areas where they were supposed to park.
So there was no attempt on the part of the Ottawa Police to keep the trucks out, because we had heard that, right, that there would be barricades around the city.
No. I mean,
they were quite happy to have.
Well, they provided the plan of where the trucks were supposed to enter into the city and where the trucks were supposed to park.
Did that surprise you, or is that kind of?
No, I mean, because
we don't really have precedent for this, right?
There's been a convoy come to Ottawa not that long ago. I think it was 2019, more so in response to advocating on behalf of pipeline construction and against the carbon tax, issues like that. And I actually was working on Parliament Hill in a work truck, like a police truck, that day that they came downtown, and they just rolled up onto Wellington, just like what happened here. It's just this one was much larger, right? But no, that didn't surprise me at all, because my experience, like the city and the different police in Ottawa, they accommodate protests and large scale events all the time, right? Like that's a regular occurrence in the city. So that didn't surprise me at all. And when I received that plan, I was like, oh, this is great. This is already taken care of. So, and I thought it was all, I was under the impression that it had all been negotiated and agreed upon. Like, okay, this is the plan. Everyone's on board. When you filter into the city, this is where these are the routes you're going to take in. This is where different components of the convoy are going to park. That's how I initially made contact. And then throughout, I already knew the RCMP guy that I thought would probably be the best point of contact from my time with the RCMP. And then the Parliamentary Protective Service person, I got linked in as well through Ottawa Police, dealing with any events that were actually going to be taking place on the actual lawn of Parliament Hill. And I actually knew her already from any time I needed access to the roof of the Parliament buildings for my old job. And then there was a second Ottawa Police liaison that I came into contact with, who was also someone I had dealt with previously in my past career with the RCMP, and he knew who I was and I knew who he was. And then the OPP, I just assumed the OPP liaisons received my number from the Ottawa Police. And that was at the beginning, that was mostly just geared towards, like, they just needed to know if there was going to be highway movements taking place, right? Because that was their jurisdiction, until they got pulled in to help with the overall, like they got pulled into the downtown core to help with the overall convoy in the downtown core.
Oh boy. Okay. So can you take us up to, I don't know if I'm going to have the dates right here. Would it be the 11th of February? I'm trying to think about the few days, right, leading up to the invocation of the Emergencies Act. People that we know in common, who I won't mention, said there was a noticeable shift in the feeling of the police presence from that sort of Friday to Saturday. you comment on that at all? How did things change? Was there an escalation? Did the trucker movement itself change at all that warranted a change in the government's response, or was it the other way around, from your perspective?
No, like the convoy maintained pretty consistent throughout the time. And actually, I don't have all the details of the negotiations that went on with the city and the Ottawa Police as far as like truck movements, but there was ongoing discussion with the city of Ottawa, Ottawa Police, and the like truck operations, you could call it, about, there was efforts being made to bring trucks from more of the peripheral locations into the downtown core. And so that would like kind of consolidate the convoy in, it's mostly for a lot of those buildings are big vacant office buildings because the majority of them are government employees working from home. And, to try and alleviate some of the concerns of some of the residential people. And the convoy was all on board with that. Like they wanted to, people on the outside wanted to be more in the downtown core where the action was, right? Like where the crowds were, where the stage was.
Mhm.
And there was I noticed a major shift with Chief Slowly. In the beginning, his language was fairly neutral and I thought fairly objective. He's got his role as the police chief, but I felt in the beginning, he was being pretty fair, right? About what the behavior of the convoy was. And then just maybe a couple of days before his resignation, he did like a 180 switch and started to use a lot of the same strong rhetoric and language that you were seeing from like counselors describing the convoy, like holding the city hostage, violent, aggressive.
Terrorist.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think he used that word, but I definitely heard that word, like he accusing us of planning an insurrection and claiming that we were domestic terrorists. I mean, we actually did press conferences to counter that, myself and other people who come from like a national, a law enforcement and national security background. What I did see a shift in him, in his language, right? Like just, I don't remember the exact number of days, but shortly before he actually resigned.
Why do you think that was?
Why do I think he resigned?
Why do you think he shifted in his language and sort of demeanor?
Oh, I suspect probably because of political pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because I mean,
so if he shifted, why resign then? He's going to cave anyway.
Maybe he was unwilling to do some of the things that they were demanding of him.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give him that benefit of the doubt, that he used some of the strong language, but then perhaps he resigned because he was unwilling to do what they were demanding of him, where the replacement was obviously very willing to do what was asked of him. And Chief Bell was using that strong, like that rhetoric right from the time that he took over, right? And making all kinds of threats about anyone who's involved. Even if you're a pedestrian protester down in Ottawa, you're going to be facing financial sanctions and criminal charges, and this investigation will go on for months. I obviously, that's speculation on my behalf regarding Chief Slowly, but I feel he was definitely either pressured to leave or left on his own accord because he wasn't willing to do what they were asking of him.
He was being
that
inconvenient in terms of his position and not sort of expediting the. Perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're getting to I'm trying to think, when did that, was that the week before the Emergencies Act was invoked, or how close?
Yeah, I think it would have been I think it was just shortly before the Emergencies Act was invoked, like probably just prior to the Like the Emergencies Act was invoked on Valentine's Day on the 14th,
The
which I think was a
Monday, I think.
Monday. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he resigned the week previous, just before the
Right.
weekend, maybe.
So the Friday,
Um,
Saturday between those two things. So we get the new police commissioner on the Monday, and then
mhm,
the Friday, Saturday, people are really noticing a change in the police presence.
mhm.
In your view, was there the introduction of a new kind of police force? I mean, you hear there are reports of a UN, army on the ground and
Mhm.
things like that. Can you give us a sense of your thoughts about that?
Well, I don't believe that the UN was on the ground. A lot of people felt like the riot police in the green jumpsuits were UN, but I identified them as Sûreté de Quebec right away.
Yeah.
And I know there was that video circulating of UN planes at the airport in North Bay. But I've had two different sources that I trust that have knowledge of the aviation industry that said like those planes are there all the time.
Mhm.
So I don't
Mhm.
I don't believe that, as much as our world seems upside down right now, I don't think that they would have the ability to bring in the UN before they brought in our own military to support civil action. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
So a shift in the existing police force in terms of their
Mhm.
behavior, not the introduction of a new police force.
Well, and I think
You think?
there was probably, well, there was a mass mobilization of police, definitely. That's no secret. They had asked for many more resources, and I think that fell in line with, like, initially it was a state of emergency for the city of Ottawa, then it was a provincial state of emergency declared by Premier Ford, and then of course the last card played was the Emergencies Act on a federal level. And my understanding is that each time one of those, every time you go up a level, it unlocks more funding for policing and resources. And so I was not surprised by the invocation of the Emergencies Act. I was really hoping it might get voted down, but I was skeptical, and turns out I was right. But um, I mean, definitely not justified, but I'm not surprised that it occurred, considering everything that we've been living
It
under
was
for the last.
consistent with the narrative,
Yeah, it was
not
consistent with
responsive to
everything we've been
evidence.
under for the last 2 years, right? Like making up rules as you go with no basis in evidence. So I think what likely happened, I mean, I like to try and, when there's a big problem like that, to sort out what's true and what's not, I usually try to lean towards the simplest solution is usually the correct one. And so I think those other officers had been there for probably 2 weeks, or they needed a rotation, like for sustainment, they needed to be rotated out. Plus, you're getting a whole pile of additional police come in to, well, to prepare for, to manage the location and the size of the convoy, plus to prepare for the potential police action.
Mhm.
And so that didn't surprise me. And so I think the shift probably occurred because over the course of the previous 2 weeks, people probably had the opportunity to build rapport with the police that were there. And my experience
Can't
as a
have
police
that.
officer, yeah, I mean, my experience as a police officer is that if people are treating you with respect and kindness, you're going to start, you're going to realize that they're not the demonized individuals that the government is leading you to believe. And so I think that's probably what was occurring. The people built a rapport, saw that the truck convoy was not, had no intention of violence or insurrection. And a lot of those police probably even agreed that our charter rights and freedoms have been trampled. Well, sorry, that's a bad use of words, considering what happened with the horses, but have been, our charter rights and freedoms have been overridden for 2 years straight.
So
So
you're suggesting that the police that was there initially, that the set of police people that were there initially were replaced, I mean, partly because they'd been there for a while and there was an exhaustion element maybe, but partly because they were getting too much they were getting too close to the truckers. They were seeing them as humans. There was too
Yeah.
much fraternity, too much understanding, and you can't have that. So
No,
we need to bring in new people it's easier for them to see the truckers as just objects, as threats.
I believe that was
Mm.
that was likely a contributing factor for sure, because we were hearing all kinds of reports, which were, I believe, to be true, and some of them were verified, of police officers like refusing to come to work like as we got into that second week, right? Refusing to support any action against the convoy, like this arrests and seizure of people's fuel, etc., and
There were
food.
several who just refused to do that.
That's my understanding, that a good amount of police officers like were refusing to work. And then like in regards to policing the convoy, and like you could see it, right? Like there's plenty of videos circulating out there where people are interacting with the police and asking like, hey, how have things been? And people saying, oh no, it's great, like everything's been great, we support people's right to peaceful protest. And that was completely counter to what city council and other political figures were saying and demanding, right? Like
Yeah, what was going
it
on in the
looks
house was so surreal, right? I was in a hotel in Ottawa, and coming home and having been there, and then you watch what the MPs are saying in the house, you just think, just walk down the hill.
Yeah,
You
just
don't
go
need
see
to
for
have
yourself.
such an abstract conversation about this.
Yeah, go see it firsthand, right? Like
so then we're getting to this weekend, right, just before Valentine's Day, and then the days early in that week, and some arrests start happening.
mm-hmm. Yep.
Right, so Tamara among them,
and Chris Barber. Yeah.
Chris, and
those are the first two that were arrests of people that were considered organizers. Yeah.
and did they know that was coming, do you think?
Well, I think Chris's maybe took people a little bit by surprise. Not entirely, like not me anyway. Like, I mean, as based on what I was seeing from the new police chief Bell, and like you said, the shift in the dynamic between the protesters and the police, an influx of new officers who didn't have that same level of rapport, the Emergency Act being invoked, like there was definitely a heightened level of anxiety, right? And people were definitely, even in the media narrative, was definitely like focusing on organizers, people who were seen to be organizers of the convoy. And so we kind of anticipated that could happen, but I think Chris's took us a little bit by surprise. That it kind of happened during the daytime. They just walked up and grabbed him. But
is that what they were, just Chris and Tamara were just outside for some reason, and
Chris was arrested separate from Tamara.
Okay.
And my based on the video that I've seen of that, he was just walking down the street like with a cup of coffee, and then the police just arrived and arrested him. And then so once that happened, we knew like, okay, this is it. They're gonna, we were expecting like them to come try and round everybody up right away, but instead it was kind of more like a piece by piece kind of thing. And I suspect maybe that was just so it was more manageable for investigators to like triage people as they're arrested and to try and like go through their investigative steps.
Right.
But or maybe it was part of this psychological operation that seems to have occurred the entire time, right? Like they would pump out a lot of strong language, and that would elevate everyone's anxiety, and then they would execute like some small level or lower level police action, and that would definitely, it was effective. Like it was distracting to what we were trying to do sustainment wise, and it was also, it kept everyone's anxiety at a heightened level, kind of like the COVID variants.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just when you think that things are starting to, like, let's say, normalize slightly, boom, you get hit with another variant, and the fear,
Well, we're in this
they drive
now,
the
right?
fear narrative,
I
right?
think we don't have to get into this, but I think we're in this now because the mask mandates are lifting just
Yep.
as we start to hear about a new wave of something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this
a
is
new
like
variant. Yep.
a great way to torture people psychologically, right? You just keep them in it and then you pull back a little bit and then something
Yep.
new and then you pull back and then
Hmm.
it's astounding to me, honestly, that you and the organization, the truckers, were able to sustain the calm for so long. I think whenever you get an organization of people who, I mean, this is a large group of people, just to
Hmm.
organize that many and to keep the morale calm through a period of time like that, I think that's just astounding myself.
Well, I think it is because the people who were seen as organizers were able to stay so steady and calm, right?
Mhm.
Like when Chris Barber was arrested, he didn't make a big stink about it. Neither did Tamara. And then, of course, others, including myself, ended up getting arrested as well.
Mhm.
And we, our messaging had always been like, we know that there's going to be an eventual police action. Like, if they don't just drop the mandates. Like the hope was drop the mandates and this is over. But
Mhm.
of course, they won't do that, right? They won't admit that they're wrong. So, you know,
So
it
you
wasn't
knew
it
all
wasn't
along it was very unlikely that you were going to get out of this without some kind of escalated police action.
no, I was very hopeful that the pressure to drop the mandates would
Mhm.
succeed because so many other places around the world had done so,
Mhm.
right? Like the
Mhm.
UK had done so just before the Canadian government invoked the Emergencies Act. The White House declared that COVID was no longer a crisis, right? So I think we were one of the very few remaining countries that still have all of these mandates in place. And the provinces, we had the official opposition replaced their leader. The provinces all started to make announcements about, dropping mandates.
Mhm.
They were at least on giving a timeline of when that was going to happen. So there was a lot of success, and I fully attribute it to the Freedom Convoy. Like they can claim all they want that it had nothing to do with the truckers and that it what had to do with their science. It's like, yeah, right. Like, sorry, you've lost all credibility with me. I know it's 100% because elections are coming up and you're trying to salvage your political career. You're seeing how much support the trucker convoy has received, and so now you're trying to jump on board and say, yay, yay, freedom. Just because it is apparent that that's what Canadians are wanting. Sorry,
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a rant there, but
No, not at all. I do want to ask you before we get into some of that stuff, though, that what were the charges that led to your arrest? And what was it like being arrested as someone who used to be on the other side of the law?
well, I had expected to be arrested the previous night, and after what happened with Chris Barber, we deliberately went out walking to, if they're going to target us, give them the opportunity to arrest us and leave other people alone, right? And so we went out that night, and we myself and Tamara and a couple others, and we actually talked to an Ottawa Police sergeant saying like, hey, everyone is claiming, the police and the media are claiming that we are organizers, we're here. And that guy was just like, well, he radioed back into the NCRCC, which is like a big joint command center that is based at the building I used to work out of, and nothing happened. And he's like, nope, nope. And we're like, okay, well, we'll be over here if you need us. And then so we went and continued mingling
Not
with
your
people.
typical criminal.
No, right? Like we were all of the opinion, like, you know what, if this is going to happen, let's just get this over with, right? And so later on that evening, that's when we were walking down the street when a patrol car pulled up, and they jumped out and they came to go arrest Tamara. And so myself and one of the other gentlemen that was there, we were like, well, you might as well take us too. We're right here. Because I was thinking, man, if I was still in the police world and I was doing a big roundup of
How
organizers
efficient.
yeah, I would be like, oh, well, this is easy. Click, 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 handcuff everybody into the police car, go back to the office, hand it over to the detectives, and done for the night. But that's not what happened. And so there didn't seem to be any logic other than either it was a deliberate psychological an attempt to mess with us psychologically, or they just couldn't handle everybody at one time. Like, yeah, disorganization, which I think is probably the case. Based on everything that I've seen over that 3 weeks, like, the claims from the police chief that we were like, highly organized and well funded. It's like, well, no, it was chaos almost every day. And the funding, hardly anyone actually got any access to the funding, right? Yeah. So we were making it work on a daily basis. And, the media narrative was that you had all these people with former police tactical training and military training, making it out to seem as if it was like some high speed operation. It's like, we're just trying to keep people fed and warm.
You were not funded by international billionaires, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, well,
just to be clear.
I mean, the deputy director of intelligence from FinTrack said that openly, publicly, on 2 different occasions, that there was no suspicious money behind the convoy, and that there was no evidence of foreign influence or terrorist financing, and that the majority of donations were from citizens of Canada. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was
surreal.
Once again, the official narrative was so far removed from the truth that it's ridiculous, right? But that's what we've been living with for, well, at least the last 2 years. Who knows how long it's been going on before?
It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
Decades, maybe.
Yeah.
Do you think the convoy was a success?
Absolutely. Yeah. We just listed some of the successes that we had, right? The big one, most provincial mandates are gone or will be very soon. Mm-hmm. We had, our official opposition leader, who was not providing any opposition, has been replaced, and hopefully will be replaced. Once the official leader is announced, hopefully it will be someone who's much stronger. Mm-hmm. And I think just en masse, it woke up, millions more Canadians to what was really happening in our country. And it generated like a freedom movement all around the world. Like, I think at one point there was over 30 other countries that had started their own freedom convoy. And, of course, the big one right now going on in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's this strange kind of vacuum, though, don't you find? There was just this kind of silence through the media over the last several weeks, not really hearing much about it at all. And I think this is it's so much more effective just to create this culture of silence against a group that you don't want to hear from than it is to openly criticize and demonize them. Right. And I'm wondering what it feels like, sort of from the inside, as someone who is so intimately involved in the convoy, what it feels like to see that in the media, that we're on to other Ukraine just took over.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that was a gift for Prime Minister Trudeau.
Total gift. Yeah. And Freeland.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. The federal government as a whole, because it has, they are putting.
Is it a gift, or is it like at Christmas where you buy your own presents?
I don't pretend to be an expert on global affairs, but that could not have come at a more opportune time for a lot of these big powerhouse Western nations, right? That are, in a crisis of their own constitutional battle with their citizens, right? Mm-hmm. Like Canada and the United States. So it's definitely served him well to take a low pile of attention away from how he just stomped on his own peaceful
and he
citizens.
Can direct all of his all the things he wants to say about freedom and how you should protect people's freedoms and individual rights, but that's really just we have a double standard, because that's just for the Ukrainians, right?
I do think that's another major victory from the convoy. So leading up to that weekend where the police action dismantled the convoy, it was amping up. The anxiety level was amping up, and I was trying to. Well, I said to many people within my circle and the different truckers and the convoy supporters that I would talk to on the street, it was like, look, if we stick to the plan of remaining peaceful no matter what, we will win either way. If they drop the mandates, we win. If they move against us with force, we still win. Like, we'll take licks, we'll take our hits, we'll take our licks, but the entire world's eyes were on Ottawa, and that showed exactly how corrupt our system, our government has become, and how tyrannical they are becoming, right? There was absolutely zero legal justification in my mind to use force against people who were peaceful, right? And like, it's such a huge contrast from what I have seen in the past, where people have been violent, like at massive protests. People have been violent towards police. They've burnt police cars, they've destroyed businesses, and it's just sometimes it's just been allowed to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has completely, I think, in the international community, it has completely destroyed whatever little credibility that they had left, that the federal government had left. And you see that, you see that from like these big media personalities now who are overtaking mainstream media, like Russell Brand in the UK and Joe Rogan in the United States. They have way more viewership than mainstream media, and every time the prime minister says something about a slippage towards how we have to be careful to guard against a slippage of authoritarianism and how we have to stand up for freedom and democracy, they call him out on it right away, and they'll show the videos about what happened in Ottawa against peaceful Canadians. And unfortunately, it's also destroyed the credibility of a lot of the police in our country, right? And
the system.
Yeah,
right?
The system as a
this
whole.
This idea that Canada is the leader of the free world and the place of envy and such an enviable democracy. I don't know how there's any truth to that, or how we preserve or rebuild that kind of reputation, but it just seems like the bottom has fallen out of all of that.
Yeah, I think it will. I don't think we will ever be back to the normal or the reality that we had before all of this, right? My hope is that we can at least get our fundamental rights and freedoms back, and people are willing, or the government and the system is willing to let us live our lives as long as we remain, peaceful and productive. Leave me alone, right?
I worry that it's as long as you remain compliant, we'll leave you alone.
Well, I do as well. I mean, that's my primary concern, and that's what I've been trying to communicate with people they're uncertain about my point of view, or they disagree with my point of view. It's like, look, this can get so much worse if we continue to allow this to happen, right? And I've never lived that, but I know so many people now. I've met so many people who came from countries like Poland and Romania and Cuba that are saying, like, I fled my own country to come live in Canada, and now I'm thinking about leaving Canada because I no longer feel safe here.
And they're saying it's better in several people of Romanian background came up to me at an event a couple of weeks ago and said that it's better in their home country now than it is in Canada. And that, as you say, they're thinking of leaving.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a horrible stain on our country. I mean, as awful as things are, one of the beautiful things I think that came out of that Emergencies Act week is we saw our Senate. We never see our Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw some really beautiful speeches in our Senate about the place of government and abiding by the truth and evidence and cautions against the overreach of government. And that was a really beautiful silver lining to all of this, I think.
Well, I'll admit, prior to all of this, I remember having my own thoughts like, what do we need a Senate for? Like, I've had those thoughts. I'm like, I just thought, no, it's just another,
then you get arrested and you think,
just another
maybe
misuse of taxpayer dollars, right? Similar to so many other things I've witnessed as my time
I'm starting to think we
as
could
a
do away
government
with the
employee.
House and just keep the Senate. How about that?
Well, so, especially because they're appointed, right? And they're not elected.
Yeah.
But same thing, like you said, now I have a whole new appreciation for those things, because it's like, I'm fairly convinced that the Prime Minister dropped the Emergencies Act before that vote took place, because it was not looking promising. And that would have been a major problem for him, before the
problem.
Right, exactly. And especially after the violent action that was taken against peaceful protesters before that vote took place. And now I understand that, like, you can't always, in a true emergency, you can't always wait for a vote to take place, but there was no imminent threat, right? There was no imminent emergency.
It was the same as it had been for the previous 3 weeks.
Exactly, right? There was no imminent threat of violence. There was no imminent threat of a insurrection by force. There was no threat of foreign influence, right? There was no invasion. It was at the very most, people found it inconvenient. But when you speak to a lot of the people that live and work in the downtown core, yes, you have the people that were very angry at the convoy, probably because they were watching the CBC and the CTV, but I've met
not out walking on the streets.
I've met a number of people who were so grateful, and they, like, the theme there that I keep hearing from them is like, I felt like I was alone. It was exactly like what my heart and soul needed, to see that much unification of Canadians. And they said, like, their business was going under over the last 2 years because of the lockdowns and all of the restrictions, and that 3 weeks for the ones that chose to remain open was like their business flourished, right? And now they're being attacked for remaining open,
right?
And they're the targets of hate for remaining open, just to try and keep their business afloat. Like, these are people that they're just trying to survive. And then you have residents who had a positive view on the convoy, and the overwhelming theme I hear from them is like, I've never felt so safe walking around downtown Ottawa. Right? They said, like, the streets were clean, the truckers were amazing. I could walk around all by myself in the middle of the night and I felt totally safe. And so, again, that major disconnect between the narrative and reality. But because of that reality, I was really hopeful that, like, they would not mobilize a mass police action until they had that vote in place, until they had that yes or no vote. But I think after they acted, and then there was the threat of it being voted down, it was a panic moment. Like, oh God, we just stomped all over democracy in Canada against peaceful protesters who were just advocating for their fundamental rights to be restored. And now we're going to lose this vote. Like, that would just, the game
I don't know
over.
if the first part occurred to them. I don't know if they realized that they stomped all over the rights of peaceful.
Fair enough.
But I think they probably realized they were going to lose the vote. And honestly, Danny, I think we just need to keep saying that over and over again, and having these conversations over and over and over again, where we talk about what we saw, or other people who were there talk about what they saw, and how important it is. I mean, when you live in anything other than a dictatorship, and you're making laws and enacting laws and having a narrative occur in your house and then disperse through the media that's based on anything other than evidence and the pursuit of truth, you get to some pretty horrible places. Where we've gotten, right? And unless someone smarter than me has figured this out, the only antidote I can think of is to keep having conversations that balance out all of that, to be very clear, craziness, right?
Hmm.
We just have to balance to have it on the other side. That might fail. Who knows? We can't control that, right? But to have these conversations where we say, I know you're trying to control me. I know you're trying to limit what we say and what we think and how we act and what motivates us. You can fine us, you can move our trucks, you can arrest us, you can penalize us in any other number of ways, but you can't control what goes on inside our minds. And
Yeah.
we will always be Canadian as long as we do that, right?
You know, um, a woman I spoke with yesterday for probably over an hour. She's incredible. She's a local Ottawa resident. She was one of those people that was giving me her version of the story. And she said to me, there was many very emotional moments. And she said to me that when she would go down to the convoy, like she went on a regular basis. So when she would go down there, she was never so proud to be a Canadian. And then she would come home and she would look at her social media feed and she would wonder herself, what has happened to Canadians? How can you go down and experience it in person and be just surrounded by joy and love and acceptance? And then you go back home to your electronic device and all you see is just hate, like wishing people would die, like just horrible, horrible things said online because of the narrative that's being pumped out from our government and our media, right? Like it's such a, that I guess that's the one thing I would have to just reinforce to people, like you said, over and over again. Like, I don't know if there's any hope to salvage the mainstream media and to get them to become truthful and honest again. And I think we waste a lot of time trying to constantly counter the negativity that they're selling, the outrage and the entitlement that they're selling. Whereas I think our time is better spent, like you said, just putting out our version as much as possible, right? Like social media has a massive reach and can be used for good if people choose to use it that way. Mm-hmm. You're seeing that major shift, like where I mentioned earlier, viewership for the news networks is plummeting while people are consuming podcasts and YouTube interviews, etc. And there's our opportunity to tell our story about what the reality was actually like. Like, the media is becoming irrelevant, and possibly even our government systems are as well, and our legal systems. So I'm kind of leaning more towards the mindset of, I'm going to try and live my best life and let them fade off into the distance as they become more and more irrelevant, as more and more people realize how deceitful they are, and just focus my energy on putting out the positive truth. That's kind of where I'm going with my mindset, because I find that it just makes you so angry to see these things that are being said about people that's completely fabricated. Mm-hmm. And so you spend all this time just toxic and angry yourself, and then trying to always play catch up, like chasing your own tail, trying to counter what they're saying. Let them fade away into the distance. Tell our story. Show what the truth really was like. I mean, there's so much video footage out there now that just keep sharing, like you said, keep having these conversations. And I think Vince Gersey's actually made a really good comment the other day when I was with him. He said, we can't just get stuck in our own little echo chamber of people that agree with us also. We have to be willing to have difficult conversations with people that we know disagree with us. And, they might accept it, they might not, but we have a big percentage of the population that need to be open to the fact that they've been lied to.
I think this is a wonderful place to leave it. But as awful as it is for people, I don't know, I hate to, it sounds stigmatizing to say on our side of things. I can't imagine what it's like for people. I was out in public yesterday and the mask mandates lifted on Monday. But still, I would say 2/3 ish to 3/4
Hmm.
people were wearing their masks, which means they either want to or they're terrified of what people will say to them or think about them if they don't.
Hmm.
And so to be in that, so I'm out, no mask, feeling very glad about it, though a little trepidatious about when it's coming back, but feeling very glad about it. But what it's like to be either part of the 30% who's firmly entrenched in this fear and hatred, or the middle 30-40% of people who have no idea what's going on because they were willing to buy into that for a while, and now some of it isn't making sense, and they're wondering, I think, well, what's the payoff of all this fear and hatred over the last couple of years, and so as hard as it is challenging the narrative and wondering how we could have gotten to this place in Canada where we see these horrible things happening. How much worse must it be to be living in that kind of vault of fear, where you don't think for yourself because you believe that you shouldn't, you believe it makes you a bad person, where you believe the government will take care of you. But my goodness, what if that doesn't happen? What if that house of card crumbles and now you no longer have the skills to do it for yourself? And where you've created relationships in your life that are based on hatred and insecurity and mistrust and judgment. And that's a far worse place to be, I think.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I mean, I always try and remind myself not to play victim and to think of a solution instead of just complaining about the problem. And I I fully agree with you in the fact that, like, people who are still living 100% sold in that fear that they're going to die if they leave their house without a mask, like, what a terrible existence that would be. Or the people that spend all day trolling people on the internet, like, what a terrible existence that must be, that that's what you spend all of your time doing, right? Like,
There's no way out of that because either you continue to live that way forever, or you have to come to the realization that you didn't need to.
yeah, yeah.
Those
And
are the
then I think
two.
that's going to be one of our biggest obstacles will moving forward will be getting people willing to admit that something has been wrong this entire time, and they went along with it, right? Because no one wants to admit that they've been had, right?
And I also think no one wants to believe that they didn't need to be as afraid as they were.
Yeah.
They didn't need that. And also that I think also there's a reluctance to believe that there's good news on the horizon. I mean, when you present the idea that COVID may be endemic and that that's okay and that we have treatments for it, that's not met with happiness. And that I think itself has been a litmus test for the kind of place we're at in society. And it's that we're going to have to grapple with moving forward, I think. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage
Things to work on.
of things to work on, yeah, and problems to solve, that's for certain. um Before we end off, I never did
Yeah.
answer your question about my arrest.
Yeah.
So, and I know it's a bit of a contentious topic. There's a lot of people that think because I wasn't charged, I'm still an insider mole for the RCMP. So I have to make sure that
Please
I don't
clarify
avoid
that.
that question. So, um, I thought I was going to be arrested with Tamara the night that she was, and I wasn't. And then the next day, that was when the police action began. I was down on the front line with my wife, and we're down at Rideau in Sussex. And all that had really taken place at that point was, like, the police would push into the crowd and take ground, and then I think the odd person might have been pulled behind the line to be arrested. But that's kind of what I anticipated they were going to do when I seen them massing in large numbers. And we were down there, and I was pleading with them to do the right thing. I was like, explaining who I was, why that we all know that something is wrong, and all we have to do is say no. Like, that was the big point I was trying to drive home, is like, that this is wrong. You don't have to speak out publicly. You don't have to cross the line. You can just say no and refuse to comply. And if everyone did that, this is over. right? If the enforcement arm just stands up to the government and says, no, we're not going to do your dirty work, it's over. Then their words are meaningless if there's no one to enforce it. And so that's what I was trying to appeal to it was the Ottawa Police Emergency Services Unit, so like their public order unit.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I had a couple of them just were like locked eyes with me and wouldn't stop. And I was trying to speak right to them, but then I was getting messages. One of the guys that was behind me was just like, hey, you got a press conference. And I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there. But he's just like, you need to use your voice. Like, this is important. You got to go. So I'm like, okay. So we ran up to the Lord Elgin Hotel, and I did, like, it was kind of a very impromptu little few minutes where I spoke after Tom Maraza at the Lord Elgin and a press conference. And then as soon as I was finished speaking, my wife showed me a picture on her cell phone, and it was a message from a neighbor saying that, like, the news is reporting that the police are looking for Danny to arrest him. So I was like, well, this is it. It's go time. So I walked outside, and I had, there's a young fella, I forget where he was from, but he's one of the people that was making like a documentary. And so he was following me and like kind of talking to me as I was getting ready to go turn myself in. And so I at first I walked down to Rideau and Sussex, and I saw like the SQ in their green uniforms, and I was like, well, these guys aren't going to know who I am. So I kind of peeled over to the side, right beside the Senate actually. And I found a line of RCMP officers, and I was like, oh, well, that's fitting. So I walked up to them, and I just said, like, I hear you're looking for me. I'm here to turn myself in. Is that true? And then I was arrested for mischief. And so the member that arrested me, he took me to like an arrest line between the Westin and the Shaw Center. I waited there for probably close to 2 hours before I was handed over to the Ottawa Police. And then I was transported to the Ottawa Police headquarters on Elgin. I was booked in there. They told me I was also being arrested for disobeying a court order and for obstruction of justice. So, okay, that was kind of blanket charges I was hearing other people were being arrested for as well, or blanket offenses. I talked to my lawyer. I got put in a cell, and then nothing happened until about midnight. So that was a total of about 10 and a half hours from arrest to release. Detective brought me out of the cell block, two of them, one great big guy, and I knew who he was. And so he had tried to speak to me beforehand, and earlier in the convoy, he had tried to get a statement from me, and I'd asked, like, is this a warrant statement or a witness statement? And he's like, oh, it's a witness statement. And I was like, well, I'm not going to talk to you unless I speak with counsel. And then I never did end up speaking to him, but he's a homicide detective, actually. So the detectives that they have working mischief offenses from the convoy are homicide detectives. So I found that in itself should be a story, right? Like,
Overkill?
you're actively neglecting homicide investigations to investigate peaceful protesters and people who are fueling trucks. Like, that's it. But they
gotta fuel the resources to the true danger, the true
exactly threat. Right. Like, forget about the murder. We'll focus on the mischief. So, and the horn honking.
I think we'll put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. So he had all of my belongings in a bag. And so I'm like, they're going to try and wheel a deal with me where get me to talk and get me to get released. That's what I was thinking in my head. And he walked me upstairs and put me in an interview room. And when he finally sat down to join me, I believe his exact words were, "Why are you here?" And
it's a very big existential question.
So I said, well, because I was arrested for mischief. And when I got back to the cell block, they also told me I was looking at disobey a court order and obstruction. And he said, "Did you ask to be arrested?" In my mind, I was thinking, like, that's not how this works. And like, no. And then I told him the story about the press conference and the message on my wife's phone and going down. And you could see that he was visibly annoyed that I was there. Like, it was late Friday night. He's a homicide detective and he's stuck working mischief files at midnight on Friday, right? He
Ah,
probably wants to be home and probably annoyed that he's not working homicide investigations. So I don't think I was meant to be arrested. So I think I'm actually, could pursue an unlawful arrest, because when I was laying in the cell, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, well, the mischief is all related to having a truck parked downtown, and I don't have that. Disobeying a court order was about the horns predominantly, and
you
that's
don't
not
have a
me.
horn.
I don't have a horn on a truck downtown. Again, which those are so weak to begin with, but I was like, well, I still don't even check those boxes. And then I thought obstruction of justice, and I'm like, well, I was like, I was maybe because I was down at the line pleading with the police not to move on the protesters. I'm like, but every time they pushed, I didn't resist, right? I had my hands up like this and I was talking to them, and they'd push me back and I'd let them push me back, and I would just move backwards while I continued to talk to them and plead with them not to do what they were doing. And so it didn't come as a surprise that they released me without charge. I thought they might try and lay like aiding and abetting on me, because that's what they were arresting people for who were fueling trucks. But I never even fueled the truck. So
So you
when
think the person who ultimately arrested you wasn't supposed to, never got an order to, thought he or she had an order to arrest you?
well, when I came down when I went down to the line to be arrested, that member said to me, he's just like, oh, please don't come to me. Please don't come to me. Please. Like, that's what he was saying in his head, because he saw me coming with the cameras. And then he said, like, when I presented myself, said like everyone was kind of hesitant. And then it was one of the supervisors that was behind him was like, yeah, grab him. And so he did what his supervisor told him to do. And I don't blame him for that. Right. Like, he could have easily just not been filled in on the arrest plan, right? Like, me coming out to meet the line probably wasn't part of their arrest plan. So
Criminals not usually so willing, I imagine.
well, I guess.
Cordial.
But I just thought, a couple of things. I'm like, well, if they're going to come looking for me, I'd rather just get this done and
Right.
you kind of insulate other people that might be around me at the time. And also, I knew that, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, but I knew that it would be kind of like a symbolic thing, right? Because I was the Mountie who spoke out. I was the guy who used to protect Trudeau, right? Like that, there definitely has like there's a bit of intrigue to that story.
Mm-hmm.
And I had become a bit of a public face because of the press conferences and other times I've spoken publicly. So I was kind of hoping too that me going down there and confronting them face to face, that some of them would have like a crisis of conscience and they also feel like, I can't do this. What are we doing here? Right. Anyways, going back to the detective, when I was in the room and I explained to him what happened with the phone message and what happened when I went and presented myself to the line, he's just like, well, he was annoyed and he's like, well, we're not charging you with anything. We're just gonna let you go. And he said, not gonna bother, big long interview asking you the same questions I've been asking everybody else for the last 4 hours, something like that. And I was like, okay. And then he said, this has to end. And I said, I agree. And he said, well, a lot of people got hurt today. And I said, well, our message has been to remain peaceful no matter what. And he said, well, I don't know if that happened or not. I'm like, well, I was in here. So he escorted me to the door, good luck. I'm like, yep, thanks. On my way back to where my wife was to go meet up with my wife, hoping that she hadn't got herself arrested.
Things we need to worry about these days.
I ended up speaking with an RCMP officer, OPP officer, and an Ottawa Police officer on my route back. And I asked all of them if they knew of any injury. Well, I asked the RCMP officer if he had heard anything about any serious injuries. And he said the only thing that he had heard about was the horse incident, but it was conflicting information about what injuries were actually sustained.
Mm.
And then the OPP officer, it was just two members in an OPP cruiser at a checkpoint. I just asked, hey, are you guys all okay today? They're like, yeah, okay, no problem. And then the Ottawa Police, same thing. And so I was like, okay, Mr. Detective, like you're trying to tug at my heartstrings a little bit here. You're trying to manipulate me, which is what, they do, right? They appeal to your emotions to try and get you to say things. So then I went back, I met up with my wife, and she was started to show me some of the videos from earlier in the day of the horse incident and some of the other more violent arrests. And I was like, holy man. And yet no information of officers being injured, right? Not from the officers themselves, not from anything I seen on video footage, and not from any other sources, like not from any of the police liaisons, like no information about officers being injured. So I think, based on everything I know, the protesters did remain peaceful the entire time. So, man, it doesn't look good.
So what does that mean then? The protesters were peaceful,
Mm-hmm.
and yet there's footage of non-peaceful actions happening.
Regrettably, there's a lot of mistrust in the police now from a lot of people that I've spoken with. I still believe that there are many that are good people trying to do good things. It was difficult to see people that I knew from working with previously down there. I don't know if any of them were involved in any of those arrests that were questionable, or the questionable use of force. But just the fact that they were down there was hard for me to accept, because you could have said no and your discipline would have been minimal.
Yeah.
But I do know that we can't. I know I've spoken to a number of active police that are questioning whether they can continue in that line of work. And I don't encourage them to leave. I always say we need good people in those positions, because if all the good ones leave, what are we left with, right? Like that's the conversation I had with my older brother. And I told him, like, we need good people in the organization to make sure that this doesn't go unchecked, right? Mm. So I'm still hopeful that more and more of them will realize that our country is headed in a very concerning direction, and that they have a huge amount of influence as to whether that continues or whether that stops. So if any police officers are out there listening right now, like, please examine the evidence and do what you know is right. Like, Canadians need you right now to be brave and to stand up to this. And I would just like to point out that someone like me, who was, relatively, spent a good amount of my career frontline general duty and then in the tactical world, like, people like me and the convoy supporters are the ones who stood up for the police when everyone else was crying, defund the police. And people like us care way more about you and your well-being than your managers do. And I know that for a fact. I care way more about RCMP officers as individuals than the commissioner does, or than our senior management does. And I don't think any RCMP officer that actually asked them, if they asked themselves that question, who cares more about me? And they gave themselves an honest answer. Who cares more about me? Someone like Danny Bulford or the senior management of the RCMP? I don't think a single honest police officer would be able to say the senior management of the RCMP, because we've seen that pattern of behavior over the years of just members getting tossed to the wolves or thrown under the bus anytime it serves a political purpose for the senior management. So I guess my final message would be stand up for what's right. They need us more than we need them, right? Like our government, these big corporations, they need their employees more than the employees need them. So we have way more influence over the future of our country than most people give themselves credit for. We all just have to have the willingness and the courage to speak up when we know something's wrong. And that's all I have. What's that?
That's all.
Yeah, that's all.
It's very funny, you know, as someone who's taught ethics and given tests in ethics and classes, and it's nothing. It's hypocritical. It's not. Living it is an entirely different thing, and ethics tests are very hard. They're the hardest ones we'll ever face, right? Just doing the right thing, just having the courage is probably the hardest thing a human being will ever have to do when it goes against the crowd. But I thank you. And by that, I don't just mean for this conversation today, but for many, many other things that have led up to this. And I know that you're going to continue to be a beacon for truth and for freedom for all of us for a long time to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's always great to see you.
Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed watching this video, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the democracyfund.ca/donate.